Hey guys, my name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be doing my November wrap-up. In the month of November, I managed to read 11 books. I'm currently still working my way through the 12th book that I would have read this month, which is Obama's book, A Promised Land. I ended up downloading the audiobook for this from LaRue, and I'm currently 82% of the way through this audiobook, but my god, this audiobook is so long. It's 29 hours long. I didn't realize that this book is 760 pages or so, so it's taken me quite a while to listen to it. I've been listening to it for the last 2 weeks, and I'm just kind of taking my time with it because I just really love it, and I know it's going to be a 5-star, but it's taking me a while to get through it, so I didn't get a chance to finish it. It'll probably be the first book that I finish in December. But of the 11 that I did complete, I only read 2 nonfiction this month. It would have been 3 had I finished Obama's book. And then I had 3 romances, 1 paranormal romance, 2 thrillers, 1 young adult contemporary, 1 historical fiction / fantasy, and 1 sci-fi / fantasy. It was kind of a lot of random mixed things this month. I also had 6 5-star books, which is totally bonkers because more than 50% of the books that I read this month were 5-star reads. Like, isn't that pretty crazy? And then I had 3 4-star books, 1 3-star, and 1 2-star. So it was very much on the high end this month, which is fantastic. The very first book that I picked up this month was Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey. This is one that just recently came out. I downloaded the audiobook from my library for this one, and this is Matthew McConaughey's memoir, just kind of like talking about his life and talking about his career and his childhood. And I'm a huge fan of Matthew McConaughey, so I found this book to be very entertaining and informative about his life, and I feel like the audiobook is the way to go if you're gonna read this book, because the experience of listening to him narrating the book is just amazing. I mean, his voice narrating this audiobook was just exceptional. It was really great. He just adds so much charisma, and it was just a really great listening experience, and I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. The only reason why I didn't get a full 5 stars for me is because some of the book was kind of written in a way where it's like a self-help book, and I just wasn't a huge fan of that kind of aspect of it. I just wanted more, like, I was just more curious about his life, and I liked getting to learn about his life, but the self-help parts of the book kind of felt awkward to me, so that was the only reason I knocked off a star. The second book I read this month was Winter Counts, and I ended up reading this one for a video that I did. I'll have it linked up above and down below, but this book is a thriller that is by an indigenous author, and it does take place on the reservation, which was really cool, and I feel like this book just has a lot of really great conversation about what it's like to live on a reservation. This one we're basically following this main character who gets paid to go and fuck people up, basically, like that's his job, and then he finds out that his nephew, who he's like currently raising, is kind of getting involved with the wrong crowd, and so he kind of makes it his mission to stop them. And this book was compared to Breaking Bad quite a bit because of the drugs happening in both of these stories, but I don't really think that that's an accurate comparison for this book. But I do feel like this book is a really action-packed thriller. Like, I was very on the edge of my seat the entire time I was reading this, so I ended up giving this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I did really enjoy this one. Third book I read this month was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by Victoria Schwab, and oh my gosh, I don't even know how to explain to you what this book meant to me. This book is a historical fiction fantasy. I don't really know what this book is categorized at, honestly. It should just be categorized as life-changing, because this book is about this woman named Addie LaRue who gets cursed. She is going to be forgotten by everyone that she meets. So she lives for 300 years, and everyone in the world just forgets her like within 10 seconds of meeting her. And then one day she goes into this bookstore and she meets this guy who remembers her. And that's kind of like where our story takes off in this book. But my god, this book is just so beautiful. Like, it's one of those books that you read and you're not the same after you read this book, because it just touches you in a way not many books do. This book, not only do I love it because of the New York City vibes in this book, like major New York City vibes, but also just the conversation about what makes a life worth living. Also a really beautiful romance happening in this story that I was just an absolute sucker for, and the ending of this book just genuinely tore my heart out. Like, I was crying I was such a hot mess of tears after I finished this book. It was exceptional. This is one of the best reading experiences I've had in 2020, so definitely 5 stars. The 4th book I read this month is Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson, and I actually ended up listening to the audiobook for this one. I checked it out from my library as well. And this book is a young adult contemporary novel, but it is very, very heavy and very dark. This book, we're following this girl named Enchanted, and she starts to get close to this guy, Corey Fields, who is this big famous R&B singer. He's basically like R. Kelly, but fictional. And in this book, we kind of follow Enchanted as she gets really close in an inappropriate way to this guy, Corey Fields, who's kind of abusing his power over her and kind of making her think that she's not going to make it in this business unless she's with him. And this book was very hard to read. This was very disturbing, but I feel like this is such an important read because I do feel like this is showing you how men so easily can abuse their power when they're in situations like this, and not just in the music industry but in any industry. And this book was phenomenally written. Like, it was so, like, some scenes just gave me goosebumps because it was written so well, and I genuinely wanted to cry a few different times while I was reading this just because it moved me so much. And I just felt so much for Enchanted as a main character. I do feel like this is one of the best young adult novels that I've read this year, and it was just so powerful and it does so much. So I ended up giving this one 5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed my experience reading this book. The next 3 books that I read were all books that I did for my reading some romance books vlog video. The first one that I read for that video was The Girl in the Love Song by Emma Scott, and I was really interested in reading this one because I love Emma Scott. And this one, I guess I went into it without really knowing anything about what it's about, and it has some of my least favorite tropes in a romance novel, unfortunately, which includes friends to lovers. I'm just not a fan, and musicians in a romance novel is just not my jam. But I still read this book, and I ended up giving this one 3 out of 5 stars. I really did enjoy the male character Miller in this book. I thought he was pretty interesting to read about. Like, he was definitely my favorite perspective to read from in this book because we get Miller and Violet's perspective in this book. They meet when they're like 13 years old, and we witnessed that for like the first 70 pages or so. They're like 13, and then for the majority of the book it's like young adult. Like, these people are like 17, 18 years old for the entirety of the book, which I didn't realize going in. I thought this was going to be more of an adult romance. I just prefer adult romances. Like, young adult romances are just like, they're just a lot of high school drama, and I'm just like not into it. So I don't know, I think I went into this one with false expectations, but it ended up being pretty okay. The ending definitely got hella cheesy though, and it kind of ruined whatever connection I had with this book, so I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was fine. And then I read Crazy Stupid Bromance by Lisa K. Adams. This is the 3rd book in the Bromance book club series, and I went into this one not knowing anything about it either. I had no idea what it was about, and this one ended up being a friends to lovers romance as well, so yay me. I should really start reading book descriptions before I just pick them up. But this one was just, this was a hot mess. This was my least favorite book that I read this month. I didn't like either of the characters that we're following in this, and it's kind of weird because we're not really following the Bromance book club in this one as much, because we're following this girl who's friends with the sister from the last book, and then we're following her best friend Noah, who's this like computer hacker dude, I guess, but he kind of knows the guys from the Bromance book club, but he's not even in the Bromance book club, so it's like, what the heck? But I don't know, I felt like both of these main characters were just so incredibly one-dimensional and dull, and I just did not care about their romance like whatsoever. This one ended up getting 2 stars from me. And then the 3rd book I read in that video is one of my favorite romances that I've read this year, and it's shipped, and I don't have the copy with me because I already gave the copy to my mom so that she could read it too, because that's how much I loved it. And this book is literally described as The Hating Game meets The Unhoneymooners, which, whoa, those are my 2 favorite hate to love romances ever. So I was freaking hyped over this book. I was so hyped when I got it. And this book comes out in January, by the way. This copy that I read was an ARC, and this book was just so much fun. It was exactly the kind of thing that I love in romance. I love hate to love, and it was just written so well, and it was so fun, and it's beachy vibes because the whole premise of this book is that these 2 people are competing for the same job promotion, kind of like The Hating Game, and then they also have to go on this company cruise together, kind of like The Unhoneymooners. It's very beachy vibes, and so they start to develop this like hate to love banter thing going on while they're on the cruise. This book was just everything. It was chef's kiss. It was so good. Yeah, if you enjoyed The Hating Game or The Unhoneymooners, then you definitely need to check this book out in January because it was lifting my freaking spirits. It was making me so happy. I was so giddy, and I was laughing, and I was like This is exactly what I need in a romance novel. Like, that is all I'm looking for right there. So this was an easy 5 stars. One of my favorite romances of the year for sure. The 8th book I read this month was Hood Feminism, and this is another one that I listened to the audiobook for. I checked it out from my library, and this book is super important, and I feel like this one should also be required reading for humans and students and everyone, because this book really touches on something that I don't think is talked about enough, how feminism is usually only catered towards white women, or how we only care about feminism that affects white women. And this book is specifically talking about how feminism needs to be more inclusive, and how we can be doing a better job when we're saying we're feminists. We need to make sure that we're inclusive of all females when we say that, and different things that we could be doing to be more inclusive. And I just think this book was really educational. It was really well written, and I just feel like I learned so much from this, so I would definitely recommend this one as a nonfiction book. It was a 5-star book for me. I really enjoyed it, and I just feel like there's a lot to learn from this book. The 9th book that I read this month is Layla by Colleen Hoover, and this one was an ARC sent to me by Amazon Publishing, so huge thank you to them for sending me this. This one comes out in December, and I don't even know what to say about this book. I don't even know. This book is like a paranormal romance, and it's kind of like thriller vibes as well. Like, I don't even know the genre of this book really, but we're following this couple, Leeds and Layla. They have this kind of almost like insta-love romance that you read about at the beginning, and then Layla starts to act a little bit strange after something happens to her, and then Leeds takes her back to where it all began, at this motel where they met at her sister's wedding, and then something creepy and paranormal starts to happen while they're at this motel. And this book is so strange. It's definitely one of the strangest books that I've ever read, but I was kind of hooked. Like, I got so sucked into this book. I know this book is gonna get a lot of comparison to Verity, and I guess if you enjoyed the creepy aspects of Verity, you're probably gonna love this, because I feel like this book was even creepier than Verity. This book had some moments where I was like, whoa, am I reading horror right now? Like, this is so creepy and so well written. But then also this book was just really strange. Like, the things that were happening in this book, my mind was just like spinning. I was like, what the heck am I reading? Like, I literally had to ask that to myself like 5 times while I was reading this. I was like, what the fuck am I reading right now? But I also loved it. There were so many plot twists that I did not see coming. Like, I was genuinely shook. And that just doesn't happen a lot these days. So I just feel like I really appreciated this book just for that alone. So I feel like I ended up giving this one a 4.5 out of 5 just because of how shocked I was by it. Like, on entertainment value alone, I would give this book 5 stars, but I really personally wasn't a huge fan of the characters. Like, I don't know, I just didn't really care that much. So I ended up only knocking off a half star because of that, but entertainment wise, I was very entertained while I was reading this. 10th book that I read this month was The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This book was also featured in that reading vlog that I did with Addie LaRue. Oh my god, this book was another one just like Addie LaRue, where I just think it's so stunning and so life-changing that it's just impossible for me to explain to you my feelings on this book. Matt Haig wrote one of my favorite books of all time, The Humans, so I went into this one with pretty high expectations. And this one, like The Humans, kind of gives you that same feeling of like there's hope for humanity, and like think about the world and how big it is and what's the purpose of life. The end of this description literally says, what is the best way to live? And that is kind of my favorite theme in books. I just love books that explore this topic. Basically what's happening in this book is we're following this woman named Nora who attempts to kill herself right at the beginning of this book. So there's definitely some trigger warnings for suicide and depression and anxiety and different things like that in this book. But right after she tries to kill herself, she ends up in this place called the Midnight Library, and this is where you go between life and death. And in this library there are millions, hundreds of thousands of books on these bookshelves, and the librarian there at the library says that all of these books are different choices she could have made in her life. So every book leads her to a different path for her own life, and so she gets the opportunity to kind of discover all of these different choices she could have made with her life. And it's really interesting because she has this book of regrets that are all of these different things that she's regretted in her life. And I love the way that this book talks about regrets, because I feel like most of the time regrets end up being some kind of bullshit miscommunication that you had with yourself. Like, most regrets that we have are so meaningless and they're such a burden on our life that it's just really eye-opening to read this book. It's really fascinating. It makes you think totally differently about your own regrets in life and about the way you're living. I love books that explore the idea that there's like alternate realities where a different version of us exists. The idea that every single time we make a decision, no matter how small in our lives, there's a different version of us out there that is living the opposite decision. And this book just really takes a deep dive into all of those things, and I just loved how thought-provoking and beautiful this book was. Like, it genuinely, it was just, and I don't know what else to say. I loved it so much. Like, I don't know if I love this as much as The Humans, because I really enjoy the comedy aspect in The Humans, whereas this one I feel like is a lot more depressing, and this one doesn't really have that same comedy aspect in it. But both of these are so freaking great, and definitely some of my favorite books of all time, and The Midnight Library is definitely one of my favorite books of the year. This was exceptional. And then the last book I read in November was Do No Harm by Christina McDonald, and this one is also an ARC. This one goes on sale February 16th, and this one is an adult thriller, and this is the first thriller that I've read from this author. So this book is following this woman who's this doctor named Emma, and her husband is a detective, and they find out that their 4-year-old son Josh has cancer right in the beginning of this book. And the only way that they can treat it is to get this treatment plan that costs like $100,000 or something crazy like that. And neither of them have that kind of money, so she starts to make this plan to steal opioids from the hospital and start selling them on the streets. This book totally reminded me of Breaking Bad, at least in the sense that we're following a parent who is dealing with cancer in their life in some way, and the only way they can make the money to pay for the cancer bills is to sell drugs. Like, it definitely has that same kind of theme that Breaking Bad has, and this book was pretty intense. Like, this book had me hooked. I didn't think I would care that much, to be honest, but I really did. Like, I really got attached to these characters just because it was written so well, and I feel like this book was just so fast-paced. Like, there were so many little plot twists happening that I was like, what the heck? I couldn't put it down. I finished this within like 2 days, and the ending just got a little bit like, it wasn't my fave, so I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. But I'm super impressed by this book, and I definitely think if you're interested in thrillers about this kind of situation where like somebody's being forced to do something that's against their morals to save their family, you know, I recommend checking this one out next year. And I really do want to check out more books from this author because this one was such a great time. Those are all of the books that I read in November. It was actually a really great reading month. Like, I had so many different favorite books this month. I read 2 life-changing books this month, and these 2 are probably going to be in like my top 5 favorites of the year. And the fact that I read these weeks apart, how lucky am I? Let me know, what did you read in the month of November? How many books did you read? What was your favorite book that you read this month? Let me know in the comments. And thank you guys so much for watching as always, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye. What are we fighting for? I can't